feeling, that physical tension, the knot that tightens in your chest, the one screaming, "Fight back! Defend yourself!" after a tough conversation or a challenging interaction with someone difficult. For years, I lived there, constantly on edge, feeling like I had to win every verbal skirmish, every perceived challenge. My energy wasn't just low. It felt like a battlefield casualty, always depleted, always running on empty. I genuinely believed strength was about witty comebacks, having the last word, proving I was unaffected and resilient. But it wasn't. My constant readiness for conflict, the internal arguments that replayed endlessly, left me utterly exhausted, drained to my core, often filled with regret over words I couldn't unsay. I was trapped in a punishing cycle of reaction and depletion, wondering why I felt so empty after engaging with certain people or situations. Every difficult person, every minor disagreement felt like an attack on my core peace, and my only defense, or so I thought, was to counterattack, which just amplified the chaos inside me. I was living in a state of perpetual low-grade stress and anxiety, fueled by the exhausting need to always be on, always prepared to defend my position, my feelings, or my boundaries against perceived threats. What I didn't realize then was that this wasn't true defense. It was surrendering my most valuable resource, my energy, to the very dynamics that were harming me. I was essentially giving away my power with every reactive word spoken or even just thought, every internal replay of conversations I desperately wished I could forget. The conventional idea of standing up for myself felt right, but the real-world results were devastating for my well-being. I was winning small battles but losing the greater war for my own peace of mind and emotional stability. But then something shifted, not easily, not without significant internal resistance, but a radical, terrifying thought began to emerge. What if the true power wasn't in the fight, but in choosing a different path entirely? What if the ultimate act of self-preservation in these draining dynamics was silence? Not angry silence, not the cold shoulder of passive aggression, but a conscious, deliberate choice not to engage with the energy-draining vortex. It felt entirely counterintuitive, deeply uncomfortable, terrifying even. It felt like letting go of the steering wheel in a moment of crisis. But this awkward, initially painful step turned out to be the unexpected key to unlocking a level of peace and energy I honestly didn't think was possible for me. It's not about becoming a doormat. It's about building an inner sanctuary, a fortress for your energy, a place where the external noise and draining interactions simply cannot penetrate and drain you dry. It's a journey from being constantly at the mercy of external triggers and your own reactivity to consciously choosing your response, or your non-response, from a place of inner strength. If you're tired of feeling like your energy is constantly under siege, or if you often regret the things you say in the heat of the moment, feeling like you're not fully in control, this story is absolutely for you. I'm going to share the specific, painful moment I realized everything I believed about handling conflict and protecting myself was fundamentally wrong, and how that difficult, painful realization became the surprising catalyst for the most profound change in my life. It was arguably the hardest lesson I ever learned, but undeniably the most liberating. Before I take you back to that pivotal, messy moment where this all began, if any of what I've shared so far resonates with you at all, please show your support and help spread this message by hitting the like button right now. It genuinely helps this content reach more people who are likely struggling with the exact same things. And if you want to follow this entire journey and discover the practical insights on how to reclaim your energy, protect your peace, and truly thrive, make absolutely sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single step or a single lesson shared. Seriously, take a second and do it now. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next in this story. Okay, are you ready? Let's peel back the layers and start at the very beginning of this painful, but ultimately transformative personal journey. It started with a specific type of person, a specific type of interaction. You know, the ones who seem to thrive on pushing your buttons, on creating drama, on making you feel small or wrong or just plain exhausted. For me, it was a mix of personal relationships, family members who specialized in passive aggression, friends who turned every conversation into a subtle competition, romantic partners whose moods dictated the entire atmosphere of the day, and sometimes, surprisingly, even casual encounters like a rude clerk at a store or a driver cutting me off aggressively that just went sideways and stuck with me, replaying, for days. I was the person who had to have a comeback. I was the person who couldn't let a perceived slight go unanswered. My mind would race, crafting the perfect witty remark or the ironclad argument. And even if I managed to bite my tongue in the moment, perhaps in public or because the setting wasn't right, the conversation would continue endlessly in my head the moment I was alone, replaying, rewriting, refining my points, anticipating their possible responses and crafting counter-arguments to those too. It was a relentless, exhausting internal loop that felt impossible to shut off. It felt like I was constantly on defense, like the world was a battlefield and my only chance of survival was to be quicker, smarter, louder than whoever was coming at me. Every challenging interaction felt like a direct attack on my worth, my intelligence, my very being, and my automatic, instinctual response was to armor up and fight back. This wasn't a conscious choice. It was a deep-seated impulse, a survival mechanism that had somehow gotten wired to perceive any form of disagreement or criticism as an existential threat. The energy it took was immense. It wasn't just the few minutes of the actual interaction. It was the hours before spent anticipating it, the mental preparation of possible scenarios, and the days afterwards spent dissecting it, replaying it, feeling the residue of anger or anxiety or indignation lingering like a bad taste. I tried all the usual advice. Friends, self-help books, online articles, they all offered variations on the same themes. Just ignore them. Easier said than done when your insides are screaming, when every fiber of your being feels compelled to engage, when the silence feels like an admission of guilt or weakness. Ignoring them felt like letting them win, like validating their behavior. Stand up for yourself, which I, in my reactive state, invariably interpreted as escalate the verbal war. Gathering my sharpest words and firing them back, often missing the mark and only fueling the fire, it rarely felt empowering. More often, it felt like throwing gasoline on embers and then wondering why I was engulfed in flames. Communicate clearly, which often just felt like I was explaining myself to someone who had no interest in understanding, who was operating from a completely different playbook, or who was perhaps intentionally misunderstanding me to maintain their position. My carefully constructed explanations would be twisted, dismissed, or used as new ammunition, leaving me feeling more frustrated and unheard than before. None of it brought peace. It might have occasionally brought a hollow sense of winning a minor skirmish, a fleeting moment of gotcha, or the satisfaction of delivering a particularly devastating line. But the war inside me raged on. The victory, if you could call it that, was always temporary and always came at a steep cost. I was constantly drained, feeling like my energy was being siphoned away by these interactions. Not just the major ones, but the cumulative effect of countless minor skirmishes throughout my week. I'd spend hours, sometimes entire evenings, thinking about something someone said in 5 minutes. My ability to focus, to enjoy simple things like reading a book or going for a walk, to just be, without the low hum of conflict or the echo of past arguments in the background, was severely compromised. I was chasing something. Validation, control, peace. Maybe I was chasing a twisted form of pleasure in the brief hit of adrenaline from confrontation. The feeling of being intensely alive in the heat of the moment, even though the aftermath left me utterly depleted, shaky, and full of regret. It certainly wasn't bringing me out of what felt like a pretty messed up pattern of reacting instead of living, of constantly being on the back foot, dictated by the actions or words of others. I remember one particular situation that became a turning point, the one that finally shattered my willingness to continue this way. It was with someone I couldn't easily avoid. Our lives were intertwined in a way that required regular interaction. Every encounter with this person was like navigating a minefield. I'd prepare myself mentally beforehand, trying to anticipate their triggers, planning how to respond calmly, attempting different tactics I'd read about, deflecting, agreeing to disagree, using "I feel" statements. But I always left feeling like I'd lost, even if I'd technically won the argument on points. This person had a knack for finding my sore spots, for saying things that just got to me, even if they were seemingly innocuous to an outsider. They had a way of subtly shifting blame, twisting facts, or simply projecting their own frustrations onto me, and I, like a moth to a flame, felt compelled to engage, to clarify, to defend. One evening, after a particularly brutal exchange that lasted less than 10 minutes but felt like an eternity, I just hit a wall. The topic was utterly trivial in hindsight, something about a misunderstanding over scheduling or a minor household chore, but the intensity, the familiar feeling of being cornered and misunderstood, was overwhelming. I left the interaction shaking, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling, and on the verge of tears over something utterly ridiculous. Later, I was lying awake in bed, hours after the argument had ended, but it was still raging inside my head, replaying every word, every facial expression, every subtle tone of voice. My heart was still pounding as if I were running a marathon, and I had this sudden, overwhelming thought, clear and sharp. I can't keep doing this. I just can't. Not one more time. The sheer, bone-deep exhaustion of the fight, of the constant readiness for battle, was heavier, more tangible, more painful than any potential satisfaction from winning or being right. It was in that moment of utter depletion, of feeling completely hollowed out by conflict, that the idea, or maybe just the possibility, of doing something radically different first flickered into my consciousness. What if I just stopped engaging? What if I didn't pick up the rope in the tug of war? What if I simply wasn't there for the fight? It seemed impossible. It went against every fiber of my being that felt compelled to defend, to explain, to justify my existence and my actions. It felt like giving up, like surrender, like letting people walk all over me, like admitting defeat. But the alternative, continuing down the path I was on, the path of constant reactivity and exhaustion, was clearly leading me to burnout, to a state where there would be nothing left to give, not even to myself. The initial thought was simple, maybe even simplistic. Just be silent. Don't respond. Withdraw. Create distance. It felt like a radical act of self-preservation, a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding of my energy. But applying it in real life, that was a whole different story. The first few attempts were clumsy and awkward. It felt unnatural, forced, even rude at times, particularly with people used to my usual level of engagement. And the first few attempts, well, they didn't go quite as planned. Simply shutting down externally didn't automatically bring peace internally. In fact, in some ways, it made the internal noise louder. I was quiet on the outside, my face a mask of neutrality, my lips sealed tight, but inside, the arguments were still raging, the frustration was still boiling, the carefully crafted comebacks were still screaming to be heard, and the self-doubt was creeping in, insidious and sharp. Was this working? Was I just being passive? Was I letting people get away with things? Was this silence actually just a form of passive aggression, a way to punish the other person with my non-response or to feel superior because I wasn't stooping to their level? It felt like I had traded one kind of suffering for another, the exhaustion of fighting for the discomfort of internal resistance and self-questioning. And I was starting to question if this peace I was trying to choose was even real, or just a new, more subtle way for my ego to hide and manipulate. This was the point where the initial, simple idea of silence shattered, and I realized the real work hadn't even begun. The next step wasn't about just being silent as a tactic. It was about understanding why I was compelled to speak in the first place, why I was so easily triggered and drained by certain types of people or situations, and what was truly happening beneath the surface of these interactions, both for me and perhaps for them. It was clear that the automatic reaction, the fight-or-flight response to conflict, wasn't serving me, but the simple act of withholding words wasn't fixing the root cause either. The inner turmoil remained, and that realization led me down a path I never expected, a path that required me to look not outwards at the people draining me, but inwards into the deeper layers of my own mind and history, where the real battle for my energy was being fought, not with others but within myself, in the unexamined patterns and unconscious drives that were dictating my life. The silence wasn't the answer. It was just the beginning of the question. The real test came shortly after that initial, rocky attempt at external silence. I was faced with another situation, similar to the one that had pushed me to the breaking point. This time, I consciously tried to implement the no-response strategy. I bit my tongue. I kept my face neutral. I didn't engage with the bait. On the surface, it felt strange, uncomfortable, like holding my breath underwater. And the other person's reaction was almost more intense because they weren't getting their usual response. It felt like they were trying even harder to provoke me. And internally, it was a storm. My heart was racing. My mind was screaming 1,000 retorts. I felt a surge of what felt like power. See, I'm not giving you the satisfaction. But underneath that fleeting sense of control, there was still anxiety, still frustration, and a lingering question. Was this truly peace, or just a performance? Was I protecting my energy, or was I wielding my silence like a weapon, silently judging the other person, thinking they didn't even deserve my words? That's when the critical realization hit me, like a cold splash of water. Simply not speaking wasn't enough. If the internal dialogue was still a raging fire, if I was still consumed by thoughts of the other person, by anger or resentment or feeling superior, then I wasn't actually free. I was just fighting the battle on a different front, and it was still consuming me. This felt like a major twist in my understanding. Silence wasn't a magic shield you just held up. It had to come from a different place. This was the point where I started to question my own motives. Was this silence about genuine self-preservation, about protecting my precious energy from a truly draining situation? Or was it fueled by ego, a way to feel above the other person, to make a point, to punish them with my lack of engagement? The line felt incredibly blurry, almost indistinguishable in the heat of the moment. I started digging deeper, looking for answers beyond simple communication tips or behavioral strategies. This is where I stumbled into concepts that connected the external struggle with the internal dynamics I was experiencing. Ideas about the unconscious mind, about how our past experiences, our unexamined beliefs, and our hidden patterns dictate our reactions in the present moment. It became painstakingly clear that my automatic, often overwhelming need to respond, to defend myself, to have the last word, wasn't just about the person standing in front of me in that specific interaction. It was tied to deeper, more fundamental parts of myself, to old wounds or fears or ingrained beliefs about my own worth or safety. When I first encountered Carl Jung's ideas, particularly his powerful statement that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate, that hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was doing exactly that. I was calling my perpetually reactive, emotionally drained state fate. Like this was just an unavoidable part of my personality, or simply how these kinds of difficult interactions had to unfold. But the truth, according to this perspective, was far more unsettling and empowering. My unexamined internal landscape, the vast and often turbulent territory of my unconscious mind, was not just influencing, but actively driving the bus of my reactions. My deeply held, though often unacknowledged, fear of not being heard, or the subtle terror of not being good enough, or the instinctive need to resist any perceived attempt at being controlled, these were the hidden forces forcing me to engage in those draining battles, pushing me towards reactions that left me utterly exhausted and questioning myself. It wasn't about the other person's power over me. It was about my own unconscious power over me. The dramatic development in this phase was the pivot from focusing on the external interaction to focusing almost entirely on the internal work. This wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't comfortable. It was, in fact, incredibly challenging and often painful. It involved deliberately sitting with the almost unbearable urge to react, to lash out, to defend myself, and instead of acting on it, asking myself why that urge felt so overwhelmingly strong. What was it about this specific comment, this specific person's tone, that triggered such a visceral response in me? It involved recognizing that the anger, the frustration, or the feeling of being attacked that I directed outwards towards others often felt like a mirror reflecting an internal conflict I wasn't yet willing or able to see. I started to see that true protection of my energy wasn't just about erecting impenetrable walls around myself or deploying silence as a cold, dismissive barrier. It was about understanding the source of the drain, not just in the obvious external dynamic, the other person's behavior, but, far more importantly, within myself. Why was I so porous? Why did their words stick to me? Why did I feel so compelled to justify my existence, my feelings, my choices, to people who seemed determined not to understand? It was about learning to listen, not to the screaming voices of panic or ego, but to a much quieter, deeper inner voice, one that wasn't driven by fear or the need to win, but by a deeper wisdom that seemed to instinctively know when engagement was genuinely necessary and when withdrawal was the only path to preserving my fragile peace and energy. It wasn't about hating the other person or even feeling superior to them. That, I quickly realized, was just another way for my ego to stay in the fight, consuming my energy just as effectively as external conflict. The real work was about understanding the dynamic, both external and internal, acknowledging that people, myself included, aren't always operating from their highest or wisest selves. And then, crucially, consciously choosing my response or the absence of one, not out of spite, not out of a desire to punish, and certainly not out of a sense of superiority, but out of a clear, deliberate decision to protect my own mental and emotional space, my own inner sanctuary. This messy, often agonizing internal struggle, this wrestling match with my own ego and the deep-seated patterns housed in my unconscious, was the true, silent climax of my journey. The external events triggering the conflict became secondary. The real battleground was inside my own head, in my own heart. There were moments of intense frustration, feeling like I was fighting against an invisible force, parts of myself that resisted change with incredible tenacity. The desire to fall back into old patterns, to just react and get the temporary release of expression, was incredibly strong. It felt like untangling years of learned behavior and deep-seated fears, thread by painful thread. I had to learn to tolerate the discomfort of the urge to speak without speaking, the feeling of vulnerability that came with not defending myself in the way I always had. I had to confront the fear that if I didn't fight back, I would be annihilated, unheard, invisible. This was where the real emotional intensity lay, in facing these internal demons, in choosing conscious awareness over automatic reaction, in accepting that the only person I could truly change or control was myself. It showed me, in the most profound way possible, that the power to fundamentally alter these draining dynamics wasn't to be found in controlling others, in having the perfect verbal comeback, or in forcing the world to interact with me on my terms. That power resided solely in gaining control and understanding over myself, over my own reactions, my own triggers, my own internal landscape. And that realization, while incredibly challenging to integrate into daily life, felt like the first true breath of fresh air after years of drowning. It was the realization that everything I thought I knew about handling conflict and protecting myself was incomplete. The real work was never external. This understanding wasn't a destination. It was the opening of a door, paving the way for a fundamentally different way of being in the world, a way that promised a resolution that felt not just like the absence of conflict, but like genuine, hard-won liberation from the inside out. It was the painful but necessary step into the understanding that peace wasn't about stopping others from starting fires, but about making my internal world less flammable. And as I stood there, metaphorically amidst the embers of my old reactive self, I knew the journey wasn't over, but the direction had irrevocably changed. And that's where I am now. It wasn't an overnight fix, and it's not like I never feel the urge to react anymore. The old impulses are still there, faint echoes sometimes, but they don't hold the same power over me. The fundamental shift has happened deep within the core of how I relate to myself and others. I learned, through a lot of trial and error and difficult self-reflection, wading through uncomfortable truths about my own motivations and fears, that protecting my energy isn't selfish. It's essential. It's not a luxury. It's the foundational bedrock upon which a life of presence and meaning can be built. It's how you survive and even thrive in a noisy, demanding world that constantly tries to pull you into its chaos, to drain your reserves, to hook you into its drama. I stopped seeing silence or withdrawal as a failure, a sign of weakness, or a punishment for someone else, but as a valid, sometimes necessary, act of self-preservation. It's about discerning the battles that are worth fighting, usually very few, and rarely through reactive, emotionally charged words tossed back and forth, from the ones that will only consume you, leaving you hollowed out and diminished. It's about recognizing that not every invitation to a confrontation needs to be accepted, that not every question deserves an immediate answer, especially if that answer comes from a place of panic or defensiveness. The wisdom I found wasn't about having the perfect external strategy, the cleverest comeback, or the most impenetrable defense. It was about cultivating an internal resilience and awareness that allows me to choose my response or my non-response consciously. By making conscious the patterns that used to drive my reactions, the deep-seated need for external validation, the ingrained fear of conflict or abandonment, the stubborn desire to always be right and prove my point, I gained the power to choose a different path. It was like pulling the curtain back on the hidden puppeteer pulling my strings. Now, when faced with those challenging interactions, the internal alarm bells still might ring, a faint ding of old programming kicking in, but they're not in control anymore. They're just signals, information, not commands I must instantly obey. I can pause. I can take a breath, creating a tiny pocket of space between the stimulus and any potential response. I can observe the dynamic unfolding without immediately getting tangled in the emotional thorns of it. I can ask myself, not just in my head, but truly consulting that deeper, quieter wisdom within. Is engaging here serving my peace? Is this exchange adding anything positive, anything constructive, anything life-affirming to my life? Or is it merely a predictable, energy-sapping drain? What is the highest choice for my well-being right now? More often than not, the honest answer, the one that comes from a place of self-respect and not ego, leads me to choose my energy, my inner equilibrium over the interaction, over the need to explain, over the urge to defend. This doesn't mean I'm silent all the time, or that I never speak up for myself or others. It means my responses, or lack thereof, come from a place of conscious choice, aligned with my values and my desire for peace, not from unconscious, often fear-driven reaction. It's a peace that comes from within, an unshakable calm that arises from knowing I'm not obligated to participate in dynamics that harm me, deplete me, or pull me into negativity. It's a quiet confidence that my worth isn't measured by my ability to win an argument, to have the last word, or to convince someone who isn't willing to understand. It's a profound sense of liberation, the kind that comes from reclaiming sovereignty over your own mind, your own emotions, your own responses. It's like I've taken back the keys to my inner kingdom. This newfound freedom allows me to be more present in the moments that truly matter, more patient with myself and others, and to direct my precious energy towards things that actually matter, my creative pursuits, my genuine connections, my personal growth, my ability to contribute positively to the world, instead of wasting it on endless, draining loops of conflict and rumination. It truly feels like I've stepped out of a fucked-up life of constant reaction, always at the mercy of external triggers and internal programming, and into one where I have agency, where I am the conscious architect of my inner experience. Understanding the inherent duality in many interactions and recognizing it within myself, acknowledging that others might be acting from their own pain, their own fear, their own unconscious patterns, while also holding firm to the boundary that protects my space, my peace, my energy, has been absolutely key. It's about letting go of the need for them to be different, for them to see things my way, for them to validate me, because that need keeps me hooked and powerless. It's about simultaneously holding onto my right to not be harmed by their behavior, to not internalize their issues, to not allow their storm to become mine. The peace comes not from them changing their ways, but from me changing my internal relationship to the dynamic itself. It's a radical acceptance of what is, coupled with a fierce commitment to protecting my inner landscape. This isn't just about managing difficult people. It's about mastering yourself. It's about understanding that your reactions are often more about your own history and internal state than about the external provocation. And that understanding, while initially painful, is incredibly empowering. It shifts the focus from trying to control the uncontrollable, other people, to working on the only thing you can control, your own response and your internal state. It's a path that requires courage, courage to look inward, courage to choose a different way, courage to sit with discomfort when you resist old patterns. But the rewards are immeasurable. A profound sense of peace, unshakable inner strength, and the freedom to live your life aligned with your highest self, not dictated by your deepest fears. It allows you to engage with the world from a place of fullness, not depletion. It's the difference between constantly being a victim of circumstances and becoming the conscious creator of your own experience. The journey continues, of course, but the fundamental direction has changed, from fighting external battles to cultivating internal harmony. So, if you're feeling drained, if you're tired of the conflict loops, If you feel like you're always saying things you regret or wishing you hadn't said anything at all after difficult conversations, know that there's a different way. A way that doesn't require you to be someone you're not or to win every argument, but simply to reclaim your power from within. It starts with looking inward, with curiosity and compassion, understanding your own patterns, and recognizing the immense power and profound peace that comes from consciously choosing where and how you invest your most valuable resource, your energy. It's an ongoing practice, a daily commitment, but the journey towards reclaiming your peace, your energy, your sovereignty, is the most important one you'll ever take. Imagine what becomes possible when you're no longer pouring your life force into battles that don't matter, when you have that energy available for living, for creating, for connecting. That possibility is real, and it starts with the choice you make in the face of the next challenge. If this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in any part of this journey, or if you've experienced something similar in your own life, please give this video a like. It helps so much in reaching more people who might be struggling with the exact same things, feeling trapped and exhausted. And if you want more insights on protecting your peace, navigating the complexities of the mind and relationships, and building a life of greater freedom and well-being, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. We're on this journey together, exploring what it truly means to live a life led by intention, not reaction. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being here.